The Space Wolves are one of over 1,000 chapters of Space Marines that maintain the age-long vigil against the enemies of mankind. They are one of the most famous of all chapters, and their name and honours are known throughout the galaxy. The Space Wolves were one of the original 20 Space Marine legions founded by the Emperor over 10,000 years ago. The Space Marine legions were created to take part in the Great Crusade, the Emperor's reconquest of the galaxy, which established the Imperium as it is today. Before the Great Crusade, Earth had endured thousands of years of isolation whilst impenetrable warp storms seethed and howled throughout the western part of the galaxy. The Emperor was trapped on Earth by these warp storms, and was therefore unable to do anything but prepare his armies and make plans for the reconquest to come. The Emperor's first efforts were directed towards the creation of a number of superhumans which he called the Primarchs. The Primarchs were genetically engineered creatures, artificial humanoids with astounding abilities. Each Primarch was created differently, with his own unique powers. Some of the Primarchs were made so as to resemble ordinary humans, but many were of titanic proportions and strange appearance. The Primarch experiment never reached its conclusion, as the embryonic creatures were spirited away by a raiding party of Chaos Demons which successfully pierced the raging warp storms to reach Earth. Before they were able to destroy the Primarchs, the demons were themselves destroyed in the turmoil of the warp storms. The Emperor was able to use his psychic powers to save the Primarch embryos, but he was unable to return them to Earth. The Primarchs were scattered to the winds of warp space and lost. The Emperor was unable to duplicate the long and arduous work through which he had created the Primarchs. Instead, genetic material developed during the Primarch project was used to create the Space Marines. A number of artificially cultured organs were re-engineered from the gene banks of the Primarchs. These organs were designed so that they could be implanted into the body of an ordinary adolescent human. Once implanted, the organs would take root and develop within the host's human tissues, becoming an integrated part of his body. Many of these organs were designed to interact with ordinary human body tissues as they became functional, enhancing muscle growth, stimulating mental processes, and subtly altering the recipient into a superhuman warrior. Compared to the Primarchs, whose genetically engineered powers they inherited, the Space Marines are but pale shadows. But they are still the most mighty of men and the greatest of the Emperor's loyal warriors. From the residue genetic helices of the Primarchs, the Emperor created 20 Space Marine legions, each utilising the genetic material derived from one of the Primarchs. Most of the implants were common in type and function to all 20 legions, but there were subtle variances in the genetic structure due to their different origins. Thus the warriors of the 20 Space Marine legions echoed to some degree the particular strengths and powers of the Primarch, whose genes were used to develop their own implants. The implants of the Space Wolves were developed from the genetic helix of the Primarch Leman Russ. At this time, the Emperor only knew that his embryonic Primarchs had been spirited away by chaotic forces. He had no idea where they were or even whether they had survived at all. Only later, during the Great Crusades themselves, was the Emperor able to recover the Primarchs. By then, of course, they had grown to adulthood amongst whatever civilizations existed on the planets where they happened to be. Not all of the Primarchs found themselves on advanced civilized worlds, or even human worlds for that matter. Leman Russ was found and raised upon the planet of Fenris. During the Great Crusades, the Emperor's all-conquering Space Marine legions liberated thousands of human worlds. Across the galaxy, humanity was drawn into a single mighty Imperium. The world of Fenris was discovered early on, lying as it does in the northwestern part of the galaxy. The youthful Leman Russ was identified by the Emperor's agents and united with the Space Marine Legion that bore his genes. Legend has it that it was the Emperor himself who finally confronted the barbaric Primarch and won his fealty by defeating him in single combat. Over the following decades, Leman Russ led the Space Wolves in many wars throughout the galaxy, proving to be one of the most daring and successful of the Emperor's generals. The world of Fenris was adopted as the home planet of the Space Wolves, and a mighty fortress was constructed in the mountains of the polar continent of Azerheim. This fortress was called the Fang, and it is still reckoned to be one of the greatest citadels of the galaxy. The Space Wolves were not the only Space Marine Legion to be united with their genetic forebear. Gradually, all 20 Primarchs joined the Emperor and went on to lead their own legion of Space Marines. One of these Primarchs was the War Master Horus. Horus was the most powerful of all the Primarchs and also the closest to the Emperor. He became the Emperor's most trusted commander and greatest friend. Horus led not only his own Space Marine Legion, renamed the Sons of Horus in his honour, but also a sizable chunk of the Imperium's forces. Horus's armies included several other Space Marine legions and their Primarchs. He undertook the conquest of the galactic north and east, and succeeded in reclaiming many thousand human worlds for the Emperor. It was a time of constant conquest, and the Space Wolves too were playing their part, though fortunately, as it turned out, in a different part of the galaxy. The rebellion of Horus tore the Imperium apart at its very birth, and set Space Marine against Space Marine as legions sided both for and against Horus. At first, few suspected the heinous evil that was to be revealed as the Horus Heresy, and some legions stood aside from the conflict, unsure of what to do. Some of the legions that sided with Horus did so out of a sense of comradeship with their old War Master. Legend has it that Horus denounced the Emperor and convinced his followers that the leader of humanity had been stricken with a murderous insanity spawned of warp contagion, or worse still, demonic possession. His loyal troops had no reason to doubt Horus at the time. It was only later that some had cause to regret their decision, but by then it was too late, for it was Horus himself who had become corrupted in spirit. It was he who had pledged allegiance to the Chaos Gods in return for powers unimaginable to mortals, even such mortals as the Primarchs. The Space Wolves remained loyal to the Emperor throughout the heresy and took part in some of its most renowned actions. From these times, 10,000 years ago, come few details of any certainty. It was a time of legends. It was an age of war. Such records as were made have not survived, and only later chroniclers of the Administratum describe the bloody events of those days. According to their own tradition, the Space Wolves were pivotal in one of the early campaigns in the war, when the entire Legion attacked and devastated the Thousand Suns Space Marines on their homeworld of Prospero. The Primarch of the Thousand Suns, the Cyclopean giant Magnus the Red, is said to have fought Leman Russ, whilst all around the rival Space Marines battled for supremacy. Eventually, the Thousand Suns gave way, and Magnus the Red fled with what remained of his forces. It was whilst pursuing the Thousand Suns that the Space Wolves lost the 13th Wolfen Company. Since then, the Space Wolves have never had a 13th Company, nor has any Wolf Lord borne the badge of the Wolfen. The Space Wolves were not present during the final battle for Earth, which ended the heresy and doomed the Emperor to a living death in the stasis field of his golden throne. Afterwards, Leman Russ was to rage against events that kept him from his beloved Emperor. He led the Space Wolves deep inside the Eye of Terror in pursuit of the renegade Space Marine legions of Chaos. With the enthronement of the Emperor came a different age, and the rule of the Imperium passed into the hands of the High Lords of Terror. Both the High Lords and the Primarchs feared the resurgence of chaos. Many worlds were purged. On planets throughout the galaxy, the tainted were sought out and destroyed. Everywhere, the rapidly expanding offices of the Inquisition prospered. Never again could the Imperium tolerate the possibility of Space Marine armies falling under the influence of an enemy. The original Space Marine legions were broken up into smaller chapters, and a code was drawn up to redefine their role and jurisdiction within the Imperium. This code was called the Codex Astartes, and it established the basis on which Space Marines would operate in the future. Whereas before the heresy, a Space Marine legion might number 10,000 or more warriors, under the new order, each chapter's size was determined at about 1,000. The original legion survived as a smaller chapter and continued to keep its old name. But the remaining Space Marine warriors were reorganised into new chapters. The new chapters became known as the Second Founding. These second founding chapters all descend from one of the original legions, and so claim a genetic brotherhood with the original Space Marines and the Primarchs. For example, the Ultramarine Legion gave rise to not only the Ultramarine chapter, but also to the Eagle Warriors chapter, amongst others. The Space Wolves were never a very large legion, and were divided only once, creating the ill-fated Wolf Brothers chapter. Perhaps the High Lords recognised the problems of genetic instability that would plague the genetic seed of Leman Russ, giving rise in later times to the terrible curse of the Wolfen, and therefore decided against dividing and further spreading the Space Wolves' genetic base. For 10,000 years since the end of the Horus Heresy and the rule of the High Lords of Terror, the Space Wolves have continued to serve the Emperor faithfully and with honour. The chapter has endured ages of constant battle. It has survived times of anarchy within the Imperium and periods of occasional isolation from Earth. The Imperium itself has weathered crises from within and without. At times it has been deeply riven by rebellion or divided by invasion. On other occasions, tumultuous warp storms have stranded parts of the galaxy for hundreds of years. Through all these years of mixed fortune, the Space Wolves have held true to the vow of Leman Russ to serve the Emperor. It would be impossible to describe at any length the wars fought by the Space Wolves over their 10,000-year history. Indeed, not even their own extensive records give a full account. Legends tell of fierce battles fought against the Chaos Space Marines following the Horus Heresy. However, no formal history of those times has survived. Some of the chapter's earliest history is preserved only in the form of epic sagas, tales of heroism composed by Fenrisian bards at the courts of the Wolf Lords. Such tales form an important part of the Space Wolves tradition, and it is in this form that the Space Wolves warriors habitually recall the deeds of the past. There are many thousands of these sagas. Some seem so improbable as to be pure invention, but most contain a germ of truth, and all are accepted for what they are, a fitting testament to the heroes of the past.